The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. This is Divya, and super excited to be with you in the new year. So, folks, I know that it's been some few days that we started the new year. I want to make sure that you guys are on track. And sometimes what happens is that we start out the new year with gusto, with all these resolutions, and only 8% of people end up achieving their goals. And sometimes procrastination sets in. Sometimes procrastination can be a good thing. Procrastination can be a bad thing. Or it can just be. So it is one of the things that can stand between us and our goals and our dreams. So for those of you who have been proactive and got our books, Expert to Influencer and The Entrepreneur's Garden, thank you so much. Or for that matter, any book that you have got. I really, really appreciate you, because the partial profits from the book sales are helping entrepreneurs impacted by the tough times. And also, as y'all remember, my call to action for you is giving away 1 hour every month. Yes, 1 hour every month to help somebody with no strings attached. Think about it. Even if 50 million or 75 million or 100 million people donated 1 hour of their time every month, we're talking 100 million hours, folks. Bit by bit, we can have a huge impact. So our today's guest is Parekh. Welcome.
Hi, Divya. Good morning.
Good morning. And how would I pronounce your last name?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The G is silent. It's called Sanaghan.
All right. So Parekh Sanaghan is a procrastination expert. He's an organizational consultant, works in higher education, along with some executive coaching. So Parekh, let's get started from the time when you were a child. And do you recall a moment that had left an impact on you for the rest of your life?
I think that, I wasn't a little child, but I moved from the Chicago area to the Philadelphia area when I was 11 years old. And I thought that was a pretty significant event in my life, because new relationships, different cultures, different people. And that first year was pretty stressful, but I learned to work through it and made a lot of friends and did pretty good in school. But that was probably one of the big changes in my young life.
Mm-hmm. And do you recall, like, when you were a child, did you have any aspirations to become a firefighter, policeman, or?
Yeah, no, actually, my mom was a school teacher and my father was an executive. And my mom had a lot of influence on me. I always wanted to be like my mom. And I have a sister who also became a teacher. We both became principals, and I became a regional superintendent in Philadelphia area. So our mom was the biggest influencer. Although my dad was a great influence, my mom was the one that we kind of followed her steps.
Oh, that's wonderful. School principal. Yes. Schools, especially today, Kids are going through so much turbulence
Oh,
and so much disruption that, yes, this disruption, we used to use that word in organizational coaching and organizational leadership as the buzzword. And now it's like, gosh, it's been constant disruption for past several
absolutely.
years.
Very hard on kids, very hard. And
Very hard
teachers
on
and
kids.
parents. Everyone's suffering.
Of course. Yes. And at the same time, there's been a silver lining where a lot of things have become normalized, where you could not be seen without having semi-formal clothes on a video call and meeting. Now people have started showing up in their jammies and their
Yeah.
kids sitting in their lap. Actually, one of our guests had a little one show up, and she was a little like, oh gosh, Divya. I'm like, no, this is perfect.
Yeah.
This is what it is. We think about that our work lives and personal lives are separate. They're so tied together that it's good that we are bringing it in. So at the same time, what has also happened is that there has been some burnout, there has been some languishing, as one of the New York Times articles beautifully put it. And there has been an impact on everybody to a certain degree. The degree may vary, but there
Yeah.
has been an impact on the whole humanity as such in the past 3 years. So, in the period of this, a lot of people think that, gosh, I am unable to do things. So, how would you separate out? Let's say somebody's beating themselves really, really hard.
Right.
Patrick, how would you distinguish between that type of procrastination habit and something that has resulted as a causation due to pandemic or due to something else? So would you give us a distinction between the two?
Yeah, I think that procrastination really is delaying doing something most of the time you don't like to do. And it's emotion based. I mean, you have feelings of anxiety or stress around the task. Usually you don't procrastinate about having birthday parties and going to restaurants with friends. You usually a task that is either overwhelming, you don't know how to do it, it's boring, tedious, just complex. And for me, that would be doing my income taxes. That's something I've wrestled with for many, many years in my adult life. I've managed my procrastination and almost everything else, but doing my income taxes is always a challenge. And usually with procrastination, the real procrastination is the avoidance of the emotions. And the minute you get away from the task, you have instant relief. It's very powerful. Now, intellectually, you still have to do the task, but emotionally, you feel a lot better than you did 30 seconds ago. And so it's a powerful dynamic that keeps on playing. And you pay a price for your procrastination by putting things off that you know you need to do. And that could be your health, that could be your wealth, or that could be your well-being. And you mentioned something, and I'm almost done here. You mentioned something about the self-criticism piece. It is devastating to criticize yourself. We beat
Mhm.
ourselves up. We criticize ourselves. And all that does is lower our self-esteem. And it also keeps the procrastination cycle and the self-loathing in place. So one of the things you can do, and it sounds like your show is supportive of this, is self-affirmations work. We know that. We know that. The research is very strong, saying, hey, I might be delaying this today. I'm going to get it tomorrow, and here's my plan of action. It does not make me a bad person to be delaying something. Is that helpful?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things, just kind of piggybacking off what you shared
Yep.
is about you're not your thoughts. Listeners, so many times what we think is that, oh, this is how I'm thinking. I've not done my fair share of things that I should have done and should. So one
Yep.
of the things to kind of know is that these are patterns, these are traps. And what happens is that you get caught in that cycle. And as you're caught in that cycle, should, you may be thinking, oh, should is a great motivational tool. It's not.
Yep.
The more you bring in should, the less things you will do. So, going back to your life, Patrick, as you grew, did you experience procrastination anytime, like in your youth or during your career?
I think in my academic, in high school, I would do things at the last moment, study like most students do, cram into the last moment. And I
Mhm.
carried that over to college and university. Um, where I really came up against a wall was I was in a doctoral program and I finished all the coursework and exams and I was writing my dissertation, but I wasn't writing my dissertation. I was reading my dissertation. and I was doing more and more research and more research. And the chair of my committee said, Pat, if you don't write a chapter this next semester, you're out of the program.
Oh.
So I was doing, it was disguised procrastination. It was kind of productive because I was learning something. But at the same time, my goal was to write the dissertation, not to read it. And so my back was up against the wall. And there, in those days, 30 odd years ago, they didn't have lots of research on procrastination or books you could read or anything like that. And so what I did was I asked a few people who had finished their dissertations, what the heck did you do? How did you finish? And everyone I talked to 4 different people, and they all had little strategies. And I said, well, I never thought about that. I didn't have any strategies to manage my procrastination. And I borrowed 3 of them from the 4 people I talked to, and I applied them, and I got 3 chapters done in 1 semester, which is a lot of writing.
Absolutely.
And I've used those 3 practices my entire career.
So, of course, I'm assuming that you know the next question. What were those 3 practices?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, one was to get someplace where you're not distracted. And 30 years ago, that was a lot easier to do than today because we got all this internet and we got smartphones and we have people, especially like you mentioned earlier about the COVID situation, people are at home and at work. And I mean, the lines are blurred, but if you get distracted, you're in trouble. And procrastinators tend to be very attracted to distraction. So if there's a room in the house, if there's a place to go, when I have to write, I go to a public library about a quarter mile from my house. And when I have to really do some writing, I go to a university about a mile away, and they have a quiet room. So no one's talking in the quiet room, and you can just get really focused. So distractions are really something you have to pay attention to. Find some place where you're not distracted. Some people use headphones. I always got a little bit nervous when I was using headphones, but some of my colleagues love them. So headphones can knock out distractions. The second one, and this is we talked a little bit earlier about the shoulds, rewards work. And I said to each one of the people I talked to, they said, oh, yeah, you got to set up a reward map, Pap. You have to have rewards. And I said, really? I mean, shouldn't I be more mature than that? Or shouldn't I be more disciplined than that? And they said, no, you shouldn't. You should use rewards. And now the research has showed us it's pervasive around the research. They're very, very powerful. So I set up a little reward system for myself by going to a movie every night, 3 nights a week and Saturday at nighttime. So I'd study for 5 hours, get in my car, drive to the movie theater. They had a 9 o'clock show. And for 3 nights a week, I'd get a bag of popcorn and I would watch these movies. And it was delightful, but only if I had done my 5 hours of research and writing. And then the third one was to make your progress visible. And I said, well, help me understand that. And they said, you got to make sure that you have some kind of checklist that you're marking off for how much time you put in or how many pages you produce, but have some kind of visible way of really making it big and powerful. And every day I have a yellow agenda that I don't know if you can see my background here, but I have a yellow agenda. I have 6 things on it, which is just about enough. A lot of people do 10 and 15 things and they never get to it. And those 3 things, being in a quiet place, rewarding myself for doing good work, and making my progress visible. And what I used was Post-its. And every 30 minutes I worked, I'd take a Post-it and I'd crumple it up and throw it into the trash can. So as the evening progressed, the Post-its got less and less, and I got more and more motivated. So those 3 strategies have helped me in my career, and I've been very productive. I've written 12 books and about 60 published articles.
So just so that we understand clearly, what you're sharing is that you do 6 things, and every item goes in a Post-it.
Yes.
And once you're done, you throw it in the trash.
Yes. And you crumple it up. It really feels good.
Yeah. It's about that physical action that brain loves. And that's one of the things, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I love. So several of my clients are, oh, I've got an iPad notebook. It feels just like the actual notebook. And we, of course, as a coach, you have to kind of give the client their own space, and it's important to create that safe space for them. And what I've found is that most of the times the clients kind of come back to the paper and pen because the brain can relate to it. It's a physical action. Because here's the thing, folks, listeners, computers have been on the horizon for past 60 years, and our brains, through the humanities evolution, has experienced paper and pen, or pencil for that matter. And when you're writing on that piece of Post-it, I can definitely see feeling that. and crumpling and throwing it away. What a powerful technique, because you're realizing it marks the end, or it marks the completion of that chore, of that task. Or you can even probably name it whatever you want to name it. You can call it a task, or
Yep.
something better that doesn't seem like, oh gosh, I gotta do the task. And I like what you mentioned about make the change visible. Make what you've done visible, because what you cannot measure, you cannot change. What you
Yeah.
cannot measure, you cannot progress.
Yep.
So, definitely a great point over there. So, given that, so many times we talk about that procrastination can be a good thing. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah. It's um, real procrastination. You pay a price for. Real procrastinators have worry, anxiety, and a lot of regret. Secondary procrastination, or what you might talk about, is constructive procrastination. A lot of us have things going on in our heads that are kind of interesting projects, possibly. Almost always, I have three writing projects, and I do them interchangeably because I run out of energy for some, and I go to the next one, and I go to the next one because I like a lot of variety. But I finally get them done. That's the key about procrastination, is actually finishing. And a lot of creative types have things going in their heads for years, a project in the back burner, and they're thinking about it and maneuvering it. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci took 16 years to do the Mona Lisa. He kept on coming back at it and back at it. And I mean, that's one of the most beautiful paintings in the world. So procrastination, if you're not paying a price for it, can be a very creative and positive thing. If you feel stress and guilt and anxiety about doing it, then it's real procrastination and not constructive procrastination. Is that helpful?
Oh, yes. That's a really good way of parsing both the procrastinations out. Constructive procrastination and something that's going to cost you. So we
Yes.
can call it a procrastination that costs you, and a procrastination that may build creativity. Yes, 16 years. And then there are so many examples where people have taken time to create their masterpieces, whether it's a piece of literary work or whether it's a
Yes.
piece of art. Is that if it's filling you with joy, and if it's something that keeps you pulling back to it,
Yep.
and if you're developing mastery. And that goes back again, right? We talk about, it used to be 10,000 hours. I don't know if that has changed or not. That if you want to master your craft, you got to put in at least 10,000 hours. Now, that doesn't mean that you're procrastinating it. All you're doing is you're deepening your level of understanding, and it's giving you that flow.
Right.
It's giving you that energy to kind of keep on coming back to it. So now, as we move forward, as you move through your school career and your PhD, so what was it that put you over the hump? I know you shared that you did the three strategies, but what took you to the finish line?
Well, I wanted to make sure the why is really important, and sometimes we lose a feeling or a vision of what are we doing this for? Because some work is just tedious and boring, and we still have to figure, okay, how does this serve my mission, my values, the place I want to be in my life? And if you can make that connection, that can push you forward. And for me, it was to make my parents proud. I mean, my dad was an executive, my mother was an extraordinary teacher, and they valued education, and the fact that I was now Dr. Sanaghan and my sister is also Dr. Londorf. They were very, very, very proud of us, and so that really motivated me to continue through the difficult times. And I also picked a topic, and I think this is important. I also picked a topic in my dissertation that I really enjoyed.
Hmm.
It had some personal meaning to me. It just wasn't doing logistics and statistics and coming out with a p squared. I wrote a dissertation that really had some personal meaning to me. And so when things got a little bit difficult, it still allowed me to motivate and move forward because it was personally meaningful to me and my values.
That's very powerful. And that's so important, because so many times, especially in today's day and age, what has happened is that people have sat down and taken a look at their lives,
Yep.
where people have experienced that, life is short, and what I'm doing, is that meaningful to me? And that's why we have seen the great resignation. We
Yep.
have seen mass exodus, people just leaving their jobs, even though they may just have, like, 2 months of money to tide them over.
Yes.
But it's about finding that meaning. And so many people talk about, oh, I want to do meaningful work. So, Patrick, from your experience, what is meaningful work?
I think meaningful work is something that is distinctive to you, something unique and distinctive to you. And you mentioned earlier in the program, this notion of an hour. To donate an hour is not a lot of time. But, times 10 million people or 100 million people, it'd be an extraordinary effort. So something that adds value to other people's lives, I think is really, really important. Somewhere you talked about mastery. People like mastery to get better and better and better at what they do. And that feels like you're accomplishing something. But the contribution to others, I think, is really the big motivation factor for most people that I've worked with and met. Making a difference in the world, not from an ego point of view, but making a difference in a service point of view. Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense, Patrick. And I completely agree. When we flip that M, and possibly listeners, you have heard me say this before. When you flip that M in me and change it to W, and it becomes we, the power. And Patrick, going back to initially the call to action that I had put out earlier, just 1 hour. And you could just be going and helping a neighbor out. Maybe you may find there's an immunocompromised old person in your neighborhood, just getting them their groceries,
Yep.
or just tiny little bit doing that. The joy that brings
Yes, it
is
does.
beyond comparison. And to me, that definitely is bringing meaning to work. And so, folks, when you are thinking about, oh gosh, I want to resign, and the next where you're looking is look where you are contributing, where it's making a dent. And I'll really like what you shared, Patrick. That what's distinctive to you. You gotta define your success. Don't go by the society because,
Yep.
oh yeah, according to society, there could be, oh, you should have a great job. Oh, you should have a house with white picket fence and 2.5 kids, which is being 2 kids and a furry friend.
Right.
It's not necessary. You got to define your success. What does it mean to you? It could be as simple as being an entrepreneur, or it could be as simple as you mentioned about, teachers play such a great role, or it could be being a firefighter.
Yes.
Doesn't matter. And there's so many, like, cybersecurity now. So many new areas have emerged
Yep.
that it's like just a few years back, if you kind of go back in 80s and 90s, which is not that far behind, probably, folks, for the younger ones, it's like, what you talking about? That's
Yes, yeah,
that's
18
way
times.
farther back especially for the Z generation. There did not used to be so many options.
Yep.
And now what has happened is that there's too many options. You go in a grocery store, there are tons and tons of sugary cereals, there are tons and tons of healthy cereals, there are tons and tons of even the peanut butter. So there's so many different options that are available. And now, of course, when as it is, you are behind, especially if you're procrastinating. And now if you have so many options, how does those multiple options have an impact on procrastination?
That's a great point, Divya, a powerful point, because you had said earlier, like 92% of the people who make New Year's resolutions, and they're all positive and aspirational. We have big ambitions. Less than 8% actually execute them. I mean, that's huge. And there's two reasons for that. I think there's three reasons for it. One is we have too many goals. We want to accomplish too much. It's that fear of missing out. I'm going to do this and this and this and lose weight and meditate and get my sleep and learn how to cook and learn how to speak French. I mean, it's silly. If we have fewer goals and we give ourselves more time, right? And we're really bad at estimating how long and how hard things are, we'll be more successful. And that's where a thought partner or a friend can be helpful in saying, Pat, you're not going to lose 10 pounds this month, probably. If you lost 2 times 5 months, you'll feel better and look better in 5 months. That's more realistic, Pat. Does that make sense? You get a thought partner who can be really honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the choices. There's a great book out there. I wish I had written it, called The Paradox of Choice. And it's by a gentleman named Barry Schwartz, who used to be a faculty member at Swarthmore here in Pennsylvania. And what they found was, and especially procrastinators, we like lots and lots and lots of choices and options and brainstorming the possibilities. And it is confusing, it's overwhelming, and we don't know how to make a real good decision. So they found in their research, and there's another researcher out of the University of Penn, that 3 to 5 choices is all you need. That's all you need. You don't need 15 or 20. And your point was really well made. And then the researcher at Penn, and I'm trying to remember her name, she said actually 3 choices, 3 options is optimal. So instead of brainstorming a list of 115 possibilities, if you can just come up with 2 or 3 choices, there's a good chance you'll accomplish those things or those options. We're too ambitious.
Yeah. So it's what you're talking about is we make things complicated, and it's just about simplifying those.
Simple. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Simplicity is important. And it's the Stoics were around 2,000 years ago. And, you read what they said, and these people really were smart. And in the modern day, transferability is powerful. I mean, they said simple things, fewer goals, watch out for distractions, use your time well, be friendly, be kind. I mean, the philosophers 2,000 years ago knew a few things. And there's a lot of books now they're very, they're in New York Times bestseller, Essentialism, and some other books are really good. But simplicity really is a very powerful notion. And not easy when we have all these, like you said, the grocery store. You go to the grocery store, there's 16 different kinds of syrup. I mean, that's nutty. If you have two kinds, you could choose. But more is in this country, we have more is better for some reason.
More is better, less is better. It's again defining what you have and seeing that what does success look like to you? Because so many people will go ahead and label people who procrastinate as lazy or people who are not doing the work. And one of the worst things that we can do to people is labeling.
Yes.
So Patrick, and especially all of us are usually most of the people that I have known are inner critics.
Yes.
Can you share with us how can that stigma be avoided and how anyone who procrastinates is not lazy?
Yeah, that's one of the great myths around people who procrastinate, that somehow they're lazy. And most procrastinators are very hardworking, accomplished, successful people. And the difference is, what's the difference between laziness and procrastination, Pat? Lazy people have no anxiety, no guilt, no regret. They just don't do it. And that's the big differentiator. So most procrastinators are not lazy at all. It's a very bad label. And it once again, you had mentioned about the self-criticism. Oftentimes they'll punish themselves in saying, "Oh, if I just had more discipline." And could I talk a little bit about willpower? Would that be okay? Because that's connected to laziness. And there's this notion around willpower that, oh, geez, if I just tough enough or I was more disciplined. I mean, I work with a lot of top-notch executives, presidents of universities, and they get to know you. And like you said, you're an executive coach, and people trust you and they share some things. And this notion of willpower is like we have this big bucket of willpower in our backpack, and we don't have willpower is a very small resource. It's like a small battery that if you use it, it just wears down, or a muscle that you overstretch, it gets tired. So for procrastinators, you have to be very strategic with your willpower because it's a very limited resource. And for many procrastinators, starting is the hardest part. So that's when you have to use your willpower, for 5 or 10 or 15-minute chunks of time. Use a couple of the tools and techniques that are in the book and punch through it. Because once you start, not all the time, once you start, there's a good chance you'll continue for another 15 or 20 minutes. So use your willpower at the beginning. For me, I have to use my willpower at the end of a writing project or at the end of doing my income taxes. That's when the last mile is the hardest for me. So I'm pretty good at the beginning and the middle. So I have to apply my willpower and my discipline tools at the last mile versus at the beginning of it. So willpower is very limited, and you have to use it very strategically.
So that's definitely a great point there. So if it is in limited quantities, how could people, you mentioned about distraction being a great temptation. How could they go about and bundle the temptation so that they could stay on track?
Yes, there's something called temptation bundling, and it's a great idea where you marry something or you attach something, an activity that's positive with something that's pretty onerous. So for cleaning out your garage, you might play the sports station. If you have to do ironing with 4 big buckets of iron or baskets of ironing, you might watch a movie while you're doing it. When you're exercising, you don't want to exercise that day, you might play your favorite music. So you marry something positive with something that's kind of negative for you. And for me, when I do my income taxes, I do it in 15-minute increments. I don't try to sit down for 7 or 8 hours and punch it out because it does not work for me. But in 15 minutes, I can do it. And I'm always watching some kind of sports as I'm doing my income taxes because I love sports. I can watch, they have timeouts, they have this and that, and the other thing. I'm doing a little bit of work watching the sports. Now, it takes me twice and maybe 3 times as long to do my income taxes, but I get finished. And that's the bottom line for procrastinators is finishing, not the time frame. So I use temptation bundling in my income tax stuff because if I don't do that, I just find I get overwhelmed with all the details. And when I'm watching the sports, it's a nice positive thing, and I can do my income taxes. And the way I keep score on that is many years ago I had to pay late filing fees twice that were pretty hefty. When I was in my early 20s, and I haven't paid any late filing fees to the IRS in over 30 years. So that's one way I can keep score that I'm being somewhat successful. And by the way, the IRS loves procrastinators because we pay them a ton of money in late filing fees. They'll see that those TV shows at April the 14th or 15th, where hundreds of thousands of people are lined up to put their income tax return at the mailboxes and things like that. It's the last minute. And that way they found in one study that about people lost about $450 worth of deductions because they hurried their income tax return. So once again, the IRS just loves procrastinators.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So here's my question for you. Is that, there's an old saying where it says, oh, you got to eat the bigger frog. So you always talk about that, that's not the right way to go about it.
Yes. Oh, that's a great point. And that's Mark Twain. Listen, Mark Twain was a great writer, but he, I think, gave us a very bad misdirection on his advice on that. If you have 2 frogs, eat the big one first. Procrastinators will never eat the big one first. It'll be too onerous of a task. But the smaller one, we have a shot at it. The smaller one, we can use a little bit of willpower to start eating it, whatever the task is. It's a metaphor, obviously. You can put a little sauce on it, temptation bundling to make it taste a little good. You can eat it with a friend, right? It's always good to have a friend or relationship there. You can do it over time. You don't have to have one sitting where you eat the little frog. You might do it over 3 or 4 days. But in the end, the little frog is done or it's eaten. Now I've got a feeling of accomplishment. Now I'm feeling a little bit successful. And now I have a bunch of little strategies I've used with the little frog, and I can tackle the big frog or the big task. So get rid of that notion. You got to tackle that. I worked with a marketing firm many years ago, and they were training all these salespeople, these cold calls. And I mean, they said, we're not doing very well, Pat. Can you help us? I said, well, tell me a little bit about your business. And I said, well, the first thing we do is the toughest call of the day is the first thing we do. And I say, that sounds very difficult to me. How about you get a few soft calls and get people feeling they are experiencing success, and then around 11 o'clock, put the tough call in. You think you could try that? They tried it. It was a game changer because these salespeople would put it off that first 8:30 phone call, and then they make these all their softer ones, and they'd feel successful, and then they had a lot more courage to go and tackle the hardest one. So get rid of that notion around eating the big frog or the onerous task. Do something small and simple, build some success, get some strategies, and then you can tackle the bigger frog or the bigger task later.
Absolutely. Very powerful. So, Patrick, you talked about relationships. And so
Yes.
many times what happens is that you may have a family member. It could be just something like, it could be your sibling and you're planning for holidays, or it could be your partner. You're trying to do something. And now, let's say especially one person, they're used to planning and that, okay, in 1 month time, this is what we are going to do. Or on this weekend, we are going to go here and oh, let's go out and eat. Now, there may be some folks who may take tremendous amount of time. I wonder if I want to go out to eat, or do I want to order in, or do I want to cook at home? And then a person may find that, oh gosh, just to make that small decision, an hour has gone by and they're
Yes.
very hungry. So this is just one example I'm kind of throwing out.
Yeah.
I've had a few clients like that. And then sometimes it could be, oh, you know what, this weekend, Are we going to my parents' place, or are we going to your parents' place, or what is happening? Are we going to go see a concert, or are we going to the ball game? So there's so many little things that can intersect with day-to-day happiness. And when it keeps on jarring, when you end up going somewhere, but there's so much thought that has gone into it. So it brings in a lot of annoyance, irritation,
Yeah.
frustration. So
Yeah.
when something like that goes on, what tips might you have for our audience?
Well, what you're talking about there is something called decision fatigue.
Mhm.
Making decisions, whether it be small or large, takes mental power and brain power. And if you're making lots of little decisions throughout the day, you can be really tired. And you should never make this an important decision when you're tired or fatigued. So if you're a morning person, that's about 80% of folks are kind of larks. They're morning people. If you have a difficult decision or a complex decision to make, it's best to do it in the morning, not at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, the other 20% is owls, people who kind of kick in around 1 or 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So they'd make their decisions in the afternoon versus in the morning. So making sure you know when your best time to make a decision is really important. You also think there's kind of a couple of stories like President Obama and Mark Zuckerberg. If you ever see those people dressed, they're dressed the same. President Obama either had a gray suit or a blue suit and the ties because he didn't want to wake up in the morning with all these big decisions to make and say, okay, does this tie go with this? And so he just had a basic wardrobe. Steve Jobs wore a black turtleneck with blue jeans for 20 years. I mean, so taking some decisions, some people have the same breakfast every morning. So I have a good friend of mine who eats oatmeal and fruit every morning. He says, Pat, I don't want to be worried about cooking eggs and doing omelets and things like that. I love oatmeal. I have some fruits. It's healthy. And he takes that decision off the table. So if there's a way for you to eliminate the little decisions so you can spend your best brain power with the big ones. And the other thing, too, you talked about relationships, having a thought partner. And sometimes that is a life partner or a wife or spouse or husband, sometimes. But make sure you have a thought partner that you can bounce ideas off of. I talked about that a little bit earlier to give you a reality check that also thinks a little bit differently than you do, right? If you pick a thought partner who thinks just like you do, right? Well, they're going to say, oh, that makes a lot of sense, Pat. But if you have someone who has a different thinking style or decision style, they can give you a different perspective and open up a blind spot that we might not be able to see. And everyone has blind spots. It has nothing to do with smartness. It's just that we can't see everything. Bring a thought partner in to help us see what the possibilities are or see what the options are or how to make a better decision is just a smart strategy to have. So asking for help is something that's hard for procrastinators to do oftentimes, and asking for help is a very smart strategy. It has nothing to do with your smartness. It's just getting some other feedback and perspective can really open up the decision-making process.
Yeah, that is definitely very insightful and helpful. So, if our listeners wanted to reach out to you, where could they connect? And if you have books that you'd like to share, please do.
Yes, I came out with a book called How to Be a Better Procrastinator, and there's a copy of it. I don't know if they can see that, but that's How to Be a Better Procrastinator. And it was written from a perspective of I'm a productive procrastinator, but I'm still a procrastinator. I mean, I know that there's certain things I still procrastinate around. So I'm not trying to wish it away or say, Pat, you're not smart enough to figure that out. I learned to manage it. And so the book is full of 101 kind of ways and strategies for you to manage your procrastination. And it's written for procrastinators because procrastinators oftentimes will only take 10 minutes to start a book or to go right to the back. And the chapters are written for a procrastinator in mind. So whatever chapter you pick, you'll get something pretty good. And then my website is my last name, Sanaghan, Sanaghan, thesanagangroup.com. And there they have all the books I've written and articles and some of the other things that we do.
Well, fantastic. So, Patrick, kind of coming back to, let's say, if listeners in today's day and age, people are totally into instant gratification.
Yes.
They want something now that give us some strategies that we can take and implement straight away. So, do you have any very quick top 2 to 3 tips besides the 3 tips that you shared with us earlier and the other things that you have shared for our listeners?
Yeah, I think that there's 2 things. I think that learning how to meditate, and this is something, if you told me this 30 years ago, I would have thought you're a little bit silly. I've gotten smarter since then. And all meditation is, and I'm not going to get a lecture on meditation, but is watching your thoughts, your breathing and your thoughts. And what you begin to realize is you don't have to react to your thoughts. And procrastination at the end of it is an emotion management challenge. Our emotions come up. Our emotions don't have to dictate our actions. And that's really hard to realize. And with meditation, that's a vehicle for understanding that. And I meditate every day for about 10 minutes. I can't do more than that. I got friends that do half an hour and 45 minutes. I can do 10 minutes almost every day. And I find it lessens my impulsivity and my reactivity. And the last thing I'd like to say is that, and this is something that's really important for procrastinators, you know, motivation does not precede action. That if you are waiting around to feel motivated to do something or feel like you're going to do an onerous task, you could be waiting for a long time. And what we know from the research, it's action, doing something for 10 or 15 minutes, moving it forward, that creates momentum, that creates motivation. So it's not motivation precedes action. It's action precedes motivation. And you'll often find if you do a little bit, 10, 15 minutes, whether it be meditation or writing or cleaning your garage, if you do that, you will then get motivated most of the time, not all the time, motivated to move forward. So get that myth out of your head that you're going to wait. I mean, creative types will tell you that. People who are very successful creative types will say, boy, if I waited to be motivated or inspired, I would not have produced anything. Just do something. Produce something, write something, draw something, get her going, and the creativity will flow. Is that helpful at all?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us and sharing
you.
sharing some wonderful tips with our listeners. And I know, folks, you may be sitting there and thinking, first thing is, do not label yourself. And secondly, as we have talked, there are tips. Yes, things can look complicated, but make an effort, simplify things. And give yourself that space and compassion. Hold that space for yourself. Give that grace to yourself. Because think about it, mostly all of us allow other people to make mistakes and move on. So do the same thing for yourself. Self-compassion is something that we don't bring into the equation a whole lot. I invite you to do that. I invite you to challenge yourself to bring in some more compassion. And the more compassion you'll bring, you'll find that, okay, you know what? I'm just going to start out with a small task, as Patrick mentioned earlier. Let's start out with small. Don't eat that big frog. Right. Eat that small frog, do the small task. And I look forward to hearing your stories. And Patrick, would you like to share something as we close out the show?
Your last point was so important. If people say, what's the one piece of advice? And I think I'm an expert in procrastination. I said, be kind to yourself. Mm-hmm. Be kind to yourself. And the self-compassion notion is very important. And I also say, listen, if your best friend came to you with a problem, you'd listen, you'd be empathic, you'd be supportive, because that's your best friend. Well, just do that for yourself, and you'll find your procrastination habit will be a lot less. Be kind. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Divya. This was great.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Patrick, for coming and sharing your wisdom and nuggets of things that we can do. So, and of course, thank you, listeners, for joining us. Without you, the show would not be possible. We love you. Our team loves you. And as always, reach out to us as to what kind of stories you're looking for, what techniques you're looking for, how can we serve you to make your lives better. That's what we are here for. So definitely do not let that goals or dreams slip away. It's still early in the year. Stay on it and achieve your dreams. And thank you, Jason, for all the technical help. And until next time, be well and see you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Park shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyapark.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyapark.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.